carrying 50 victims arrived at Evergreen Cemetery.
We got a call from the assignment
Following last November's mass killings in Jonestown, Guyana, the money being used to recover the more than 900 bodies.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to Cult Chronicles. I'm your host, Danny, and today we have the luxury of having another guest. We have Naomi Wright from beEmboldened, excuse me, and she's going to talk about her organization, her background, and all of that. Before we get into any of that, though, I want to thank our sponsor. You guys already know. So thank you, Wise Wolf Gold, for sponsoring both of my podcasts. Guys, if you want gold and silver delivered straight to your house for as little as $50 a month, go to rabbithole.gold right now. Hi, Naomi. Thank you so much for coming on Cult Chronicles.
I'm so glad to be here. And I just realized, so this is called Cult Chronicles. This is not Rabbit Hole, but I realized this was so unintentional, but like I have a little rabbit on my mug and I was just noticing that while you were doing your intro. And I was like, oh, it's technically not the right one, but look.
Well, I have the rabbit hole. This was actually a gift sent to me by my husband's best friend. So they sent me this rabbit hole thing and it's in the background of every single video that I do. And
I love it.
It's just the thing that I have. And I have like more rabbit hole merch than I have Cult Chronicle merch because Cult Chronicles is newer. And so rabbits are great.
So, they are. I actually love rabbits and I've been trying to talk my husband into getting a rabbit for years and he thinks they're exotic animals. And I was like, dude, you grew up in Denver. No. They're literally everywhere. There's nothing exotic. I'm like, I think what he means by that is just like they don't belong indoors. I'm like,
I mean,
they
do keep them outdoors.
I know.
I guess it depends. Like, do you want it a pet or like, are you going to eat them?
No, I don't want to eat it. I want to hold it and pet it. Yeah.
Yeah. You could do both, I guess.
Well, that's a trauma story. Actually, you want to start there? We had pet rabbits and my dad took one once and like took it to his friend who butchered it. And then we had to eat it in a stew.
Oh, man.
It was not a cult ritual, though. It should have been because I grew up in a cult, but it wasn't. It was just a poor decision.
Well, I was in SEER school in the Navy and we had to kill a rabbit and then they put it in a stew and it was delicious. And I'm not sure if I love rabbit because of that or if I was just starving.
Yeah. I mean, it's different if you had named it and like pet it and all that, you know, before.
We did not. We did not.
Yeah.
We were just trying to survive.
Exactly. Totally understand.
Let's get into your story a little bit. So you grew up in a cult. Can you kind of start there and then what led you to beEmboldened and starting everything that you're doing now, all of your amazing work?
I grew up and I call it a pseudo-Christian cult. And the reason I call it that is because I was told that I was Christian my whole life. And so, I mean, I grew up in public school, which got me in a lot of trouble in ways because I would tell people like, no, we don't celebrate Christmas because we're Christian. They're like, well, we do because we're Christian. Like, what's up with that? And so that, you know, then it was like I was the weirdo who didn't know her own faith or something. But
right.
So I was raised again, like, no, I'm Christian. Like, this is Christianity. And then come to find out it was totally not. And so I call it pseudo-Christian for that reason. Like there wasn't another kind of title for it.
That makes sense.
It was a spinoff of this group called The Message. The founder of that, like primarily was William Branham. And he was like 40s, 50s, died in a car accident in 65. And a lot of people felt like they were kind of like carrying the torch forward after he died. My dad was one of those people.
Okay.
And he then kind of spun off in his own way, though, where he was trying to go up and down the East Coast and tell different message churches like, hey, here's kind of the new revelation now that Branham has passed. And he got kicked out of them all. So then he landed in New York, Ohio, kind of back and forth between the two and started his own version and then recruited his own followers to that. So he's not really the message either.
Did he think that he was like a prophet?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. He thought he was a prophet and he thought that he was kind of like, to use like a Christian context here for someone like John the Baptist was the guy who like came before Jesus came.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was seen that my dad was the prophet before Jesus was coming again.
Oh, okay.
So he like had the truth. He was the one that we had to be listening to in order to then be saved when Jesus came back.
That gives a good context for it, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate how you're like, it makes sense, but no, it doesn't. Like,
right.
It doesn't.
The context makes sense, but like, yeah, it doesn't make any sense logically.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And so we believe that because we didn't like a lot of these groups, just drawing a commonality, like when we're talking about like a pseudo-Christian kind of like cult, even cult-ish group. Now an end times view can be the rapture, like that could be a biblical view. I'm not coming at that.
Mhm.
These groups tend to hold that view though, and use it to like threaten people, basically like super stress them out of like, you're going to get lost in the grocery store and not be able to find mommy and daddy. And it's because they've been raptured and now you've been left behind. I mean, like
Oh my
this is the kind of
gosh.
stuff that happens, or it's at least the effect of it is
Mhm.
that, kids are really concerned. Nobody wants to move. Everyone wants to like stay huddled together. And so there's all this kind of like control that's wrapped up in the theology. Now, again, that's not like what should be happening. It's just what cultish groups do with the idea of the
Right.
rapture. So we didn't believe in that in the rapture though, because we were all supposed to, like, Jesus was supposed to come back. We were supposed to just like all be here. Like that was the view that I grew up with, was we're going to all walk into the new heavens and the new earth together. We don't have to worry about anyone dying or anything like that. And my dad died when I was 21. So it's like, well, wait, hold on. Like that wasn't supposed to be able to happen.
Right.
So that was a whole mess. And then we kind of rationalized that, which I'm happy to circle back to. But my mom then died when I was 25. She had been my world. So that like really tugged at like those threads in my worldview of what do I do with this? And like,
Mhm.
what was all of that? I had grown up with all of these holiness standards. So the long dresses, the super long hair that had never been cut, like no piercings, no makeup, no, we didn't celebrate any holidays. Birthdays like on and off, depending, like there was a little flexibility there. We always celebrated Thanksgiving, which I joke is just because my dad liked good food. Like there was nothing like religious about it, nothing. It was
Right.
just like, yay, let's eat.
Is there a religious tone to Thanksgiving, like in general?
There can be. I've seen more in Christian households, like as an adult myself, I've seen them focus just on being thankful and on gratitude
Yeah.
for like what they've been provided with for the year. And so, but I guess I've never really classified it as like a Christian holiday. It's just like
Right.
an American, a United States holiday.
Yeah.
But that's like the addition I would say that I've seen in Christian households. So
Okay.
I think we did actually like, excuse me, pray before that meal, which we never like prayed before every meal or anything.
Okay.
But that was one where we did, I guess. But yeah, it was just a stressful day because my dad was super abusive. He was abusive in all of the ways. And so he was home all day. Yay. So
Great.
I hated Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving was awful. He was physically abusive. He had a horrible temper. That he never bothered to figure out how to manage. We were told that that was the spirit of Elijah in him, where it was like that fiery, like, which is so not even the context of what that's supposed to mean biblically, but like,
Right.
okay, he's just that way. And so we need to understand that he's that way. And he's also a man, so he's going to be faulty. So you have to pay attention to like the godliness in him and let the rest of it go, which is really teaching a child to dismiss abuse in order
Or
to
like,
maintain something else.
yeah, justify it.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, make it okay and continue to stay in the relationship, right? It's like,
Mhm.
no, like justify it, like dismiss it, like somehow rationalize it, and then stay in the relationship. So that was, of course, incredibly confusing and harmful growing up. So he was really physically abusive, would it's not that he was physically throwing us into stuff like all the time, like every day, but you just never knew when it was going to happen because he would just turn on a dime.
Yeah.
And it was constantly psychologically abusive because of that, like such an unpredictable, chaotic environment. It was a polygamous group. Fun fact, shouldn't skip that. That's always like a fan favorite. So didn't
Yeah,
even
people
just, skip
like
over that part.
people are very intrigued by polygamous groups, I find.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, they're a mess. So I understand the intrigue.
Yeah.
I'm not Mormon. Usually that's the first question you'll get, or you'll see like comments, like, oh, is it Mormon? It's not, because the rest of the theology doesn't match. It's just that polygamy was embraced. And so my dad had multiple wives. He
It's very Old
and
Testament of him.
very Old Testament of him. Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes, absolutely. And there's a difference between like what's prescribed and what's described. Just because something is in a book doesn't mean that you're actually, even if we're believing it's the holy word of God, which I'm Christian now, I do believe that.
Okay.
Even if you do believe that, that doesn't mean that you're supposed to do it all. And we know that because we literally see Jesus in the New Testament contradict like Moses in the Old Testament. So it's like, well, that's because that's how they were doing it. We're now being told not to do it that way, all of that. And so it's like, just because it's in there doesn't mean you're actually supposed to do it all. You
Right.
can't do it all because it changes. So with that being said, yeah, it was seen as like, well, this is in the Old Testament. So at least it's okay. It's not like we have to, but it must be okay. Really, what it comes down to, and this has been a lot of work in my life and a lot of hard conversations to like really understand and accept the reality of it. My dad definitely was sexually deviant. Can we talk about this on your podcast? Is that
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
You can talk about, I mean, I have talked about some
Wonderful.
really tough things on my podcast. So please, as much as you want to share, we'll allow it.
Great. Okay. So, I mean, anytime I'm going to share anything about my story, it is a massive trigger warning. So, like anything that I'm going to say about my personal
my
story, like,
whole
there's going to be stuff
podcast.
that's hard. Yeah, exactly. So, and I don't say that without care. I say it with a lot of care.
Right.
So he was, yes, practiced polygamy. He was also sexually abusive. I know for sure towards myself and my older sister. I'm not sure about the younger sisters. And so there was like that incestual element there, as well as pedophilia because we were younger. And the women that he was then marrying, he was in his 50s or his 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And he was kind of like making backdoor deals with dads when the girls were like 13, 14, so that when they were 17, they would become his wives. So he was attracted at 13 and would wait till like that legal age in order to then marry them. And so, I mean,
that's better than some cults. We covered the FDL or FLDS, and they didn't even wait until they were like, you're 12, let's get married. Like it was awful.
And let's record it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
which was the case for them, not the case for us.
Right.
Yes. So, and all of this is going on while I'm in public school and my mom works for the school, and I'm having to like pretend none of this is happening because we need to protect my mom's job. And we were supposed to keep my dad safe because like the world didn't understand, how we believed and didn't understand. And so like polygamy is illegal. And of course, abuse is illegal. You can't abuse children and sexual abuse and all of these things. And so, but like that was the mentality, was like all of this fear and all of this like needing to hold it all up to make it okay, like starting as a very young child. So that was the dynamic of me growing up. And then again, when my dad passed away, I was already starting to like step out. Like I felt really bad. Like I felt like maybe God was mad at me, but like at 14, I bought my first pair of pants. I could still remember what they looked like. Got them at American Eagle, loved them, changed in the bathroom at school, and then changed back. And slowly my hair started getting shorter, like creeping up my back. Like I thought nobody would notice, right? Like obviously that's noticeable. So started kind of doing those kinds of things, dated outside of the group. Ultimately, my first marriage was outside of the group. I mean, my second marriage, my husband now is outside the group too, but like, I'm not in the group. That's what.
Well, I was going to ask about if you were married or like selected to be married at like a young age to be married at 17, or if by the time your dad died, you had not been married yet, like you were still unmarried.
I was married by the time my dad died. I got married 6 months before, but I married my, I guess, high school boyfriend. I mean, he was my boyfriend starting like summer before senior year. He was not in the group, but he was like open to the group. So that was like what made it feel like maybe it was okay. He never ended up actually joining, and I never ended up like fully being in it as an adult. Again, I was always kind of like straddling this line. But when I would have been like 8, 9, maybe 10 at the oldest. It's hard when you grow up in like heavy trauma environments to like place timelines always and stuff. So, but I know I was like, I was not a teenager yet. Like I was young. There was a guy who was like so nice to me. And I mean, I'm sure people are getting the idea of like, oh, she probably wasn't treated awesome as a child. Like, no, like even within the group, no, because my dad was the leader. And so it was like, well, you can't trust her. She could go tell her dad, or we're mad at him about something, so we'll take it out on her. Or, we have a lot of wives, and obviously they don't all get along because they're not really supposed to all be sharing one dude. And so there's dynamics there. And so, oh, we're not going to treat you well because we don't like that your mom is also married. So there's just like, it was just a bunch of garbage, and so lots of gossip, and it was just awful. So coming from that kind of background, all of a sudden this man is like so kind to me as this little girl. And he's like buying me stuff. Like I got a lot of secondhand stuff, which was totally fine. We were lower income, but my mom, like, I never felt it, which was really beautiful. Like I look back and I'm like, I didn't feel like I went without. Like I ate every day and I had home cooked meals, and so I really credit her for that. But to get like something brand new was still like crazy.
Yeah.
I can still remember this jacket, Danielle. It's probably not cute anymore, but I don't know, maybe like in a vintage way. But it was like a suede winter coat with like the kind of like sherpa around the cuffs and sherpa around like the collar. And it had this pretty colorful floral embroidery that like went down the front.
I can imagine it.
Right. And it had to be like kind of spendy, especially compared to like what I would have been used to. And so I get this coat from him and all this stuff. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, this guy's like the sweetest. And then come to find out is because he wanted to marry me when I was old enough. Like that was the reason. And I'm like this little girl, 8, 9, 10 years old, again, max like 10.
Right.
And my dad did block that though. And I think why? So I really believe that on some level, he knew what he was doing was wrong and he wasn't going to allow that to happen to me, that he was going to let me make my own choice.
But wasn't he doing that to you?
Well, he wasn't going to allow someone else to like stake claim on me as being a wife later. He was going to let me choose when I got older. Like he wasn't going to like make it.
So he like had this
she's promised
weird protection over you, even though he was doing the same thing.
He was doing the same thing to others. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
That's so odd.
And I think it shows that again, on some level, like he knew it was wrong. And the whole polygamy thing to begin with, I mean, I've heard stories from my older siblings who, there's like a big age gap. Like he was married to one woman and then he wanted to get in the polygamy lifestyle like way later. Like he already had 6 children with this woman. They had been married for a long time. And so then when he met my mom, his first wife then divorced him.
Oh,
totally fair.
I mean, I wouldn't be okay with that.
Right. So there was like this older group of siblings though, who were never a part of the polygamy element of it. They had a lot of abuse. They were not a part of the polygamy element. So I heard some stories from them when I got older after my dad died, because we actually never met. I didn't meet them until my dad had passed away and we had to deal with the estate.
Wow.
And then all of a sudden, like I'm in contact and it was crazy. Like got on a plane and flew down to where they lived and get picked up at the airport by a brother I've literally seen a photo of, and then go to a house with like 20 people that I've never met that I'm related to. And it was just like crazy intense. Most of them are so lovely.
I mean, that's good,
but them are so lovely. Yeah. It's just, it was a lot. But I heard stories from them about how he was growing up, like just like the pornography, like hidden under the bed, and the going off the road into, a ditch or whatever, because he's craning his neck to watch a woman jog, like while he's got the kids in the car. And like, that kind of stuff where it's like, obviously the guy had a high libido and he decided to make something give him what he wanted. Like he then went in this direction of this theology is going to meet a desire that I have, and really not being too worried about what it was going to do to everybody else. Because if we're going to talk about attachment for a second.
Yeah.
Again, or maybe not again, because I guess we didn't do a bio, but being a licensed mental health professional. So being a licensed mental health professional in the state of Colorado, if we think about attachment for a second, I mean, talk about chaotic. Like I had siblings in other states. We saw each other just on holidays. I had to lie and say they were my cousins. I couldn't even call them my siblings. Like you have all this kind of stuff going on. I mean, we were literally taken from our mom for weeks at a time, starting at very young ages, because he didn't want us to become spoiled. And my brother was literally like 2 weeks old. Wait, 2 weeks, or I have to double check. I think he was only 2 weeks old when he was first taken away from my mom for a little while, because he was bottle fed.
Oh my gosh.
And it's like, and I have that in a note from my dad, because my dad like wrote a letter to my mom back. And I have that letter. So like I have evidence, like I have the receipts that this stuff is true.
It makes me want to cry. Like I'm like tearing up because my baby is so young still. And like I couldn't imagine, like even at his age, and he's over a year now, but like even at his young age, like it makes me want to cry.
Yeah.
Oh.
And my mom always wanted to be a mom. And she had horrible upbringing, incredibly poor. Like she wore her brother's hand-me-downs, like just
Wow.
incredibly poor. They did not have food security. And then both of her parents passed when she was a teenager. So then she's on her own. So she got married at 19 to a man who ended up being incredibly abusive, physically abusive, lots and lots of affairs. She finally breaks away from him. I think he ended up deciding he didn't want to be with her or something happened, but that split happened. She then believed, because she was more in a like Catholicism kind of view at that time, she
Okay.
believed she could never remarry. And she had
Oh,
always
wow.
ached to be a mom. So she's like 26 and is like, okay, I guess that's it. Like it's over for me. Then my dad comes along with this new belief system, is all about her. I mean, she was stunning. He's like all about her, swept away by her, super romantic, like, oh, writing those cards that like personally make me want to throw up in my mouth. Like I'm like, oh, don't call me your dove. Like that's disgusting.
Ugh.
But some people are into that, like to
I
each
mean,
their
and
own.
she
That's
needed
totally fine.
love. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it worked for her. She loved all of that, like romanticism in that way and stuff, which again, that's her thing. And so, and then was like, wait, I can have children. And so then she finally gets to have these two babies. She had my brother at 38, had me at 40.
Wow.
It's to have these two babies, and then is like not even able to just like fully enjoy it. But she loved being a mom. Oh my gosh, she
Breaks my
loved us
heart
like
for her.
crazy. Yeah.
I'm sorry that she's gone now. It sounds like as much as she wanted to be your mom and like wanted that like that connection, you felt that.
I did feel that. Yeah, she was definitely my person. And at the same time, I do have, I believe, like a holistic view of there are ways in which she did not protect me. I also and I say that and I could put a period there. Like there are
Right.
ways in which my mom did not protect me. And when I held my son, when I had him 7 years ago, I was just like, I don't know how you could not. Like I can't wrap my head around that. And yet I wasn't her.
Hmm.
And so like it would be really incredible to be able to have a conversation about that now. Like I wish I could talk to her and be like, what was this like for you? Like what was going on in you that like I didn't get to hear because I was a kid and you were trying to, shield me from
Yeah.
what you could. And I'm glad she did. Like I didn't hear all the drama and all the things. I think there were some ways in which I was like parentified for sure. But not all the ways. Like it wasn't exclusively that. But yeah, I mean, I would definitely like my heart hurts for her too, while also being like, you didn't do something for me that I needed. So
Right.
there's that both and I think there can be that when we're talking about any human, there's like this tension of there's some really good and beautiful. And then there's like this really hard, like sometimes straight up just bad. Like I don't even comprehend that. And it's like, well, can both coexist? And I think oftentimes it does. I think with someone like my dad, I've come to the place of recognizing he was way more bad than he was good.
Mm.
He was way, way heavier on that side. I do think my mom was more heavily on the other side. And I think the stuff that was bad, I don't think she knew. How she didn't know again is hard for me to understand, but just like knowing what I knew of her belief and like what a strong believer in this she was. And just like she was known as like being like the powerhouse woman for this, like just so strong
Okay.
and like so studied it and so like passionate about it. And it's just, she was incredibly indoctrinated. I think she was absolutely victimized herself and taken advantage of. And again, my dad literally too, within like, because I have siblings who are only like a couple years younger. So
Hmm.
like very quickly he would have been taking other wives after he had
Yeah.
met her.
Well, I wonder too, like for her story, and obviously we can't ask her, but like she was abused prior, and I don't know the statistics right off the top of my head, but I know that like when you typically once you've been abused, like unfortunately you find another abuser. And so I'm wondering like how much that played into your father and her and their relationship and how that kind of moved forward with all the polygamy stuff and all that.
Absolutely. And I think knowing, at least from my understanding, he wasn't really physically abusive with her. And so that would have been very different
Right. And so
from the
maybe it was like,
ex-husband. This is
well, it
better.
could be worse.
Yeah, like, and she did like really love the guy. I mean, like
So,
I saw that. Like she really loved the guy. And I think about too, like her getting married at 19 the first time and just like what we know from a neuroscience perspective of brain development. It's like, I mean, her neural pathways were like all getting created still. And she still had like 8 years of that left, 8, 9 years of that left. And like how she would have developed.
yeah.
So, and I'm not saying my dad had a perfect upbringing either by any means. And yeah, I just see more so where again he was a predator and he was looking for the people that he could prey upon and get what he wanted out of it.
Unfortunately, I mean, we see with cult leaders that they're very good at that. And so,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, your mom was a victim to that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I think too.
When did you find, I mean, you were slowly waking up as a teenager. When did you finally like leave? Like your dad died and then your mom died. Were you still a part of the organization when your mom died, when your mom passed away?
I wasn't really a part of it. I was already divorced. I got married at 21. The divorce was finalized at 24.
Okay.
Um, he had, I mean, fairly in retrospect, the dude was in over his head because my dad died like 6 months into that marriage. And what was done with that was also like wackadoodle. I mean,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
it was believed he was in like a younger body, like preaching and teaching somewhere else, and was going to send new believers over. And so no one would move. And they're like making copies of his book, of like his sermons, and like all this stuff. And so he never like said that that was a factor. I'd be curious, like, was that a factor? I might have to text him. But it's like, yeah, that was probably a factor. But overall, it was a lot. And we were young and we owned a house and we were just like kind of in over our heads. And I was a mess. And I was like trying to deal with the estate stuff and went and met all those
Right.
siblings for the first time, like I mentioned. And while I was out of town doing that, he had an affair of some kind or another. Ultimately, we tried to work it out, and he was like, "I want to go to Colorado for a year and hike around, and I want it." And I'm like, "Well, that's at least separation. Like, we're married." So
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, he was like, "Yeah, I don't love you anymore. Like, I'm done." So that was, I say that because I was a real mess by the time my mom died, then, because in three and a
Right.
half years, I lost all three. So I'm
Oh,
25, and I'm like, truly was considering unaliving myself because I'm like, I have no idea what to do with any of this,
mm-hmm.
and I'm alone. And I did finish the year my mom died. I was in a 1 year advanced standing master's program for my licensure for
Mm-hmm.
my mental health professional, and I wanted to finish. And so because my dad died right before my master's the first time and I ended up withdrawing. And so I was like, 3 years later, here we go again. I'm trying to do this program and now my mom dies. I'm like, I'm going to finish the program.
That's
So I
interesting that
finished the
you were
program.
going through like the worst time in your life and like you're considering suicide and you're going through like a mental health master's program.
It was helpful. Like, honestly, like it was hard. It was so hard. It served as a distraction that I think I needed at that time. It helped me ultimately for sure
Good. I'm
because
glad.
I knew the value of reaching out for help. I think most commonly what I see and what I do now, which I know we'll talk more about, but with what I
Mm-hmm.
do now and coming alongside other survivors, it's really hard to reach out for help. Like, first, what even was that? What kind of help am I even looking for? Like, having the
Right.
language for it is like barrier one. And then any kind of trust, like in someone else or in ourselves to even choose someone else, or in like, I mean, that's really hard. Talking about it is really hard. And so it helped me. I was already in a place of like, I support professionals. Like, I believe this is a good thing. And so it helped me to start trying to reach out for help. The
Good.
difficulty though was like nobody got my context and I felt more
Oh,
like a
yeah.
case study than I did like a human being who like really needed help. And in all fairness, people didn't hear this every day, which I totally get, which is another reason why I do what I do. But that basically what I learned to do, which helped me a lot, and I'm glad I do it. I stand by it, and I would recommend this to anyone who's like, I cannot find good smart for my context. What I ended up doing was I kind of removed my context to a degree and just focused more
Mm,
on the issue. So, like, if I was struggling with depersonalization, derealization, which I was, instead of talking about why and like how that came to be, I would just talk about what was happening and like what are tools to help with that. Like what's kind of like our standard framework and like let's leave
Okay.
out the details.
Right. Because not everybody can understand the details, but they can understand like the basic. Yeah.
They understand, yes, they understand the disorder. So it's like, okay, here's a disorder. Like how do we help with this disorder? I also had access, like I was I had bulimia pretty like violently so for several years. That was another coping strategy that I had available to me at that time. And so I then realized like, okay, I know that it's serving me in one way, but it's harming me in another way. And I want a coping strategy that's not going to harm me in any way. And so I want to retire this and I want to learn something new. And so I had access to continuing education to learn how to treat myself, which again, I don't necessarily recommend that you try to treat yourself, even if you're in that position. But for me, being so like confused and scared and all of that mid-20s, like it helped me. So there were these different things that served me. Being in public school had served me. Like I had seen other ways of living. I had met other good people who didn't believe like I did. Like I knew that there were other good people out there. I knew other people who said they believed in God who didn't live the way I lived. So that was curious to me. So I had like these other kind of frames of references that like really served me. But it wasn't until I was 28 that I realized it was a cult. So I had this period of like, I'm not living the lifestyle. I'm like I'm not really in touch with people overall, but like the door is open. Whereas now it's slammed shut, because of what I do publicly. So the door is not open anymore, but it was at the time. And so it was sort of like, that's how I would say, like the door was open, but I wasn't actually living it out. I would think that the perspective would have been like, maybe Naomi's going to come back, like she's kind of figuring out right now, she's going through a lot versus like this hard, like line in the sand of like, no, I'm done. And I don't believe this. And this is why.
Right.
So it wasn't until I was 28 where I was like, okay. And it's like the silliest way I realized it. And this is really common as well for survivors there isn't like this big, like amazing story. It's so anticlimactic. It's like, just like that straw, it's just like that straw that broke the camel's back. And so I just had that straw finally, because I had spent so much time like, oh my gosh, all of these Christians that I'm talking to, and had a lot of friends who weren't Christian as well, like atheists and such. And I still do. And whenever I was talking to someone who was Christian, they're like saying all of these things that I could then go find in the Bible. Like it was literally in there, but it was in direct conflict with what I had been raised in. And so I was like, well, what my dad said, like, is blatantly not correct. Like there was some stuff that was just like really, not everything in the Bible is like super black and white easy.
Right.
But some of this stuff was where I was like, did he not even read this thing? Like, I don't understand. So I was doing all of that, like kind of mental gymnastics and well, but they just don't know this other stuff. Like that's kind of what was going through my head. Like, well, they don't know about this piece or that piece. And like, I didn't feel elite. I felt like awful. Like I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't want to like keep information from them.
Right.
That would like maybe give them salvation. But like, I also just felt totally unequipped and scared and I don't know what I'm doing. And so, because some people they'll feel more of that, like, well, I'm part of the elite. Like I'm the true Israel. I was more just like scared, scared and feeling bad. And then, at 28, I was in a group like gathering thing. It was like a small group thing for newlyweds because I had met my husband and we had gotten married. And the wife of the pastor, which is a big deal that I was even in this group, like still today, like not really a huge fan of small groups. I'm like, please don't put me in a group and tell me they're my people. That doesn't work for me. Like I'll go find my own people and I'll invite them all over. Like we'll do it that way. But I was in this group and it worked out in my favor because she mentioned something about a cult and it just like clicked in that moment. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's why this doesn't all compute. This is like why it doesn't all fit together.
Wow.
My dad was a cult leader. And so then I had to like back up and re-look at everything through that lens and like start to connect all of those dots and all of those pieces. Because then it's like, well, he wasn't abusive because that was like God in him, or this was that because of the man aspect, or he wasn't watching me in the shower at 10 because he was being cutesy, and he didn't start kissing me on the lips at 16 because like it was fine. Like, no, like he had a problem and he wasn't getting help and he just leaned into it instead of like turning away from it. And so I was just like,
community around it, so it could just like
yeah,
make it okay.
right. Yeah. So like all the cards had to come down, and I had to take it slowly though, and like really adjust certain elements at a time, because it really genuinely would be overwhelming. And I encourage people to take it slowly. Like I know some, depending on personality, it's like, I need to figure all this out right now. And intellectually, like maybe we do go faster. Like if that's someone's style, the emotional part though is just going to take longer. It just does.
Of course.
And like we need time. We need time to grieve. We need time to feel all the things that we didn't even get to feel before because they were disallowed. And then I realized there were emotions I didn't even know how to handle. I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, I'm not someone who struggles with anger, because I would just like disconnect from my feelings when I felt angry in order to keep myself safe. And then I actually started feeling anger, and I'm like, I like to yell. I have to mature in how to handle this emotion now. Like I need some emotional maturity and like how to regulate with anger and how to express it in a healthy, productive way. And so I was like, oh my goodness, like I have all this stuff I have to kind of like back up and do now, which is honestly similar to what we see with people who have had substance dependence. Where like there are certain areas of themselves where it kind of like hangs out pre-substance. And then there's sort of this catching up, so to speak, and they don't have to actually catch up. It's just like, okay, this is where I'm at now. And so there's some other things that I need to lean into and spend more time on. And it was similar for me of like growing up in such a high control environment. There were areas of development that did not get to develop. And so I then had to go back to those areas and give them more attention.
Wow. That's really interesting. It's really hard to conceptualize, like, as a person that has never been in a cult. Although, okay, I say this with every guest. Like, some people call the military a cult, but it wasn't like that. Does that make sense? Like, I don't know. It's hard for me to, like, fully understand because, yeah, like, how... And we don't have time to get into this, but I can't imagine being your husband during this time. And, like, just being with you, like... working through all these things. Yeah.
Do a part 2 with Michael.
Right.
Yeah.
Would he come on? I would love to.
Oh, he probably would. Yeah.
Because like, how do you help somebody like hold their hand through this? Like, I was in a cult and now I have to figure out how to function knowing that. Yeah. I'd love to have him on.
Yeah. And some of the learning he had to do. Because when we were, I don't know if we were engaged yet or not. But one day he told me, he's like, well, babe, you know, I think you were raised in it was a cult. And he very quickly learned, you don't say that.
Oh,
you don't actually say that.
Well, maybe he could help people. Does he help in is it a business? It's a nonprofit?
Yeah, it's a 501c3, so it's a federal nonprofit. And yeah, he does do things for the organization. He doesn't do like one-on-one direct support because that's not his professional area. But he does like co-facilitate some group stuff with me again. Like I love his perspective of being that because he was my primary person for going. I mean, he was in that group with me when I realized it was a cult. And again, he had known it was a cult.
But he can't tell you, he can't convince you of that.
Right. And then he was like kind of scared of like, okay, now she's realized that it's a cult. Like we're married. Like where's she gonna land?
Yeah. Oh man.
You know? And so that for him of having to really just support me, and me reassuring him too of like, I'm gonna do the work, so it's gonna be okay. I mean, I'm not just giving up and being like, oh, I'm just going to stay here. Like, no, like I value growth. I value development. Like I like being challenged. Like I'm going to keep moving forward. So like, you don't have to be worried that like, this is it for the rest of your life. Like I'm going to keep moving forward just as I expected that of him.
Right. Absolutely. So what led you to beEmboldened? Like what led you to start this organization? Because a lot of people that have gotten out of cults, some people do want to speak up and like help people get out or like help people with the transition, but some people can't get there, and that's okay. Everyone's like on their own journey. I'm not trying to judge anybody's journey, but what led you here?
Well, I got to this point where, COVID, we'll just start there.
COVID had changed everybody, I think.
I mean, yeah, COVID happened. And I was like, it was kind of funny because I had totally lost my career in 2016. I was a hospice social worker and totally lost my career at that point because I had gotten in a really bad car accident, had a TBI.
Oh,
And I
man.
couldn't emotionally regulate for a while. It was like a 3.5 year recovery process. And so like legally they had to hold my job. I'm like, that's awful. Like I'm not coming at the law. It can be a good thing, but I knew I had a long recovery and I was like,
Right.
the team needs help. So I chose to resign from that. And then through that recovery, I started working for a friend's sister's business. She had an event company and I was her first like hire outside of the family helping out. Well, the organization, like this company, like ended up blowing up, and I ended up being the COO of this multi-million-dollar
Wow.
company, overseeing a team of like 50 people. So incredible experience. Well, then
Yeah.
COVID in 2020. So event
Ruins an
industry
event
shuts down.
company. Yeah.
Right. And I had just in January of 2020 told my husband, like, this is going to be my career. I love fostering a team. I love pouring into a team. Like, I just thought it was the best thing. And so I was like, this is what I'm going to do. Well, then the company shuts down 2 months later. And I'm like, okay, I guess this isn't what I'm going to do because she was ready to move on. I didn't want to take it over. So, like, we weren't going to sustain the company through COVID.
Right.
And so I was like, but I had this, like, just feeling inside of, I think it's time to pivot. Like just kind of like in that quiet of COVID, everyone we had to slow down. It's like, okay, we're like coming down from all the busy and all that. And it's like, what's like going on inside? Like, and I had this, and maybe not everyone had that experience. I know I certainly did. And like in more of that stillness, I just felt like I have continued to live like this duplicitous life of like new friends didn't know how I had been raised. Friends that I had had for 30 years, like knew a little bit, but hardly any of it. And I'm like,
Right.
I've just continued to filter so much because I was raised to filter. So I
Right.
filter people out of things, I filter experience out of things. I just had those kind of autopilot answers that I would give to questions like, because then I was in seminary because that was part of it for me was I want to learn like what do I actually believe. And so I went to Denver Seminary, and what I really appreciated about that program was it enabled me to actually ask questions and get to explore those answers and not just be told what to think, but to be like, here's tools to investigate, like do that.
Yeah.
And so that had been really helpful. So I was in seminary, I started that in 2015. And so I knew through that experience too, like I can't be the only one. But even in seminary, I was like filtering out, like go around the room, like, oh, like, did you grow up in a denomination? Did you? I'm like, I grew up in a cult, but I would just say no, non-denominational, because it was just like that's what I would say.
Right.
And I'm like,
Because how do you explain?
Right? It's like it's supposed to be like a 5-second intro that's going to take 20 minutes. Like here
Yeah.
at this point, I can just like here, I'll send you Danielle's podcast. You can listen to it there, and then we'll pick up. But I was in this place of like, I'm exhausted from doing this, like all of this filtering out, all of this, like I am so fatigued. And it's also landed me in a place of feeling really lonely because at like the deepest level, nobody knows. And I'm like, there has to be someone else too. And I knew that like philosophically, but like I hadn't met anyone. And like,
Right.
I know there are other people like me out there. And I had gone on to experience other forms of spiritual abuse, not only cult abuse, so like mainstream denominational. My husband later on worked for a Christian organization. We experienced it in the organization. And so like there's a whole bunch of ways that this can look.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, there's no way. Yeah, there's no way I'm it. And so I wanted to connect with others. I wanted to remove some of that isolation. And also within my worldview, I felt like, and like the Lord had done a lot in pulling me out of that. Like I very much saw it as my dad did really bad things. And I'm thankful that I have been able to get out of this.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I credited the Lord for that. So I'm like, well, I want to share what he's done. Like, I want to share what this has been, like what this journey has been. So I ended up creating a video, took that super seriously. I was like, a lot of stuff that comes along side people that I had seen in the past, it looked very like mom and pop kind of sketch. Honestly, that's my opinion. And I was like, as someone who grew up in a cult, it kind of looked like a cult. And so I was like,
Right,
that's not gonna
yeah.
work for me. And so I was like, I wanted everything to be super well done. And so we like flew in a group from Chicago, a production team, and like record this video literally in my whole hometown. Like if they look at the video, like that was the house, that was the playground. Like we were really there.
I
The
watched
park
your
is where my
video.
parents' ashes are spread. Like it was all like a very legit thing. And just started from there. And like, I'm just gonna start with sharing my story. And then from there I just kept having like just as a creative like more vision for the organization, and I started seeing more of what the needs were. Like yes, like I couldn't find support who understood my context, like just that sense of talking to someone and like they get it, and you
Mhm.
just can feel that they get it, and then they ask better questions because they get it, like they can catch the nuance better. And I'm like, I want to offer that to people. I know how hard it was to find, so we added what we call our mentoring services. That was our first service.
Okay.
And mentoring, it's similar to counseling. There are some distinctions because we do work across state lines and we work internationally in countries all over the world. And so there are like some differences there that we go over with people so that they're fully informed. And then through that success, we then were like, okay, there's a lot of I'm like, there's so much that I'm sharing with every single person I meet. Like there are some common denominators here. So created a digital course with myself and 3 other real life survivors engaging. So it's not just me like sitting here looking at a camera talking. There's also authentic conversation, like engagement components where like we're all dialoguing. So lots of different people for others to connect with and like follow, find solidarity with, learn through their stories. And I'm like, I want to offer it in that way because maybe not everyone wants to reach out and talk to us, talk to me or someone else on my team because that's scary. So they
Yeah.
can just watch this in the privacy of their own home and it's anonymous. They
And they
get
can
their
figure it
privacy.
out as they
Yeah.
go. And if they want help, they can reach
Yes.
out then.
Yes. And they're learning about like the grieving of like the losses that we suffer. And they're learning about boundaries. They're learning about the science of trauma. They're learning about like questions to ask for any kind of community. Maybe it's not a church community. Maybe it's like a book club or a sports league, or we can have crappy leaders anywhere. So like those
Yes.
kinds of things to help just get people like with their feet under them.
Hmm.
And then we've continued to record digital courses. We've got 2 more coming out this year. And then I was like, we're also seeing people who are wanting to start connecting with others, which is a really important aspect in healing from trauma,
Yeah.
is to be able to have like an experience that is contradictory, to the previous one. And so that's a really big step. So like, why don't we offer that in a way where it's still facilitated? It's way lower risk because you've got one of us there and we're like ensuring like boundaries are adhered to and
Right.
good healthy conversation and modeling and such. And so we then launched our BE Plus, which is a monthly subscription program, which includes a lot of benefits, but the main one is like getting together as groups. So and then we ended up moving into, we've got whole congregations that have experienced harm, or people who are
Oh,
like,
yeah.
yeah, I do want to walk back into a church, but I want them to like get it. And so we offer like workshops and things like that too. We are not exclusively though for people who identify as Christian right now. Like that is not a requirement. I'm very upfront that I do, just because I think transparency is important in this area.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, I mean, stuff that I say will be informed by my worldview. So I want to be upfront about what my worldview is because
Yeah.
I just know that it's going to influence, and I'm still a professional, of course. So it's not about like my opinion, but I just think that again, that transparency is important. But I have clients who are atheists. I have clients who don't know. I have people who are like kind of exploring and all across the board with denominations and different views and things. And all of that is wonderful. Like, I love how you had said kind of what you had said about like we can have those common results even if we haven't had the same experience. And I'm
Yeah.
such a big believer in that. Of sometimes people will hear my story and they'll be like, well, mine wasn't that extreme. Like it doesn't matter. Like you've experienced unjust harm, like injustice has happened and you have been wounded through that. That's where we come together.
Yeah, and it's really tough. I think that the groups are an amazing thing. I went through something pretty traumatic and I joined a group. I did not want to join the group. It was my therapist and she was like,
Sure.
"Maybe you just come to the group once and if you don't like it, don't ever come back." And I was like, I'm going to hate this." And I went and it was so validating because like what I had been through felt so isolating and
Yeah.
nobody gets it, and it wasn't a cult experience. It was something different, but it was still like something so like personal. But then to go to a group of a bunch of people that are like, yeah, this sucks. You're like,
Yeah.
thank you. You're like
Right.
the only person that understands that this sucks.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was a group. There was like 20 girls in there. It was amazing. It was so helpful. So I love that you
Wow.
guys are offering groups.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And the people who are coming, it's a newer service, but it's definitely picked up speed. And just like seeing the connections happen, it's incredible. Yeah, it's so healing. And it's continued healing for me as well. Like I'm not there for me, of course, like there's like
Right.
proper boundaries there, but um I think therapists are being dishonest if they don't say that they're learning as well from those they're engaging with. And so I'm like, I love it. Like I truly feel like it's a privilege to be able to. I meet the most amazing people.
That's
These
awesome.
are incredible people. Like there are and I think it's helpful for others to see it too, who are like, are there any good people on this planet left? Like when you've experienced something so awful,
Yeah.
and then you meet all these amazing people who have like similarly suffered, and it's just like, oh no, like maybe there is hope. Maybe there's hope for my life. Maybe I can make some good friends again, and like this can be different in the future.
I know for me, like I felt dumb. I felt like I put myself in the situation and I was an idiot. Like, how dare I do this to
Mhm.
myself? And so, like, being in a room of people that I felt almost were like more intelligent than me, which is just like me, like talking to myself, right? This isn't like,
Yeah, your self talk.
right. So I was like, oh my gosh, like, I'm not an idiot.
No.
Like, this could happen to anybody, right? Because there's
Yeah.
like all walks of life. And this was my personal experience. Obviously, this isn't everybody, but like, I know that it was very helpful. So yeah, I'm very happy that you guys are doing that, even though,
Mm.
yeah, I'm not involved. I love what you're doing.
Thank you. Oh, I'm glad. I appreciate hearing that. Yeah, my goal is to create the organization in such a way that wherever someone's at, there is a safe option for them. Like it feels safe. Like I want it to be as low risk as possible and create different ways so that people can engage. That's why we have an active YouTube channel and we put out interviews and we do live streams and we're going to start doing some periodic events too, like over Zoom where people can join. I'm going to be working
That's
with an
awesome.
art therapist that I'm so excited about
That's
to do some
cool.
like art therapy things virtually. And so like just different ways again for people to be able to connect where it is feels safe. Like if it's like, okay, here's my comfort zone, it like just maybe pushes against it a little bit. We are not trying to plow through anyone's comfort zones. We just want to like maybe gently push. We're looking
Hmm.
for that like baby step. That's it. And so
Absolutely.
wanting to provide those options.
So I have a couple questions for you because I want to kind of help people in like understanding different aspects. So, can you talk about a couple signs of spiritual abuse, like what people should look for if they think that maybe they are being spiritually abused?
So the way I like to look at it, I'm going to use Stephen Hassan's model of the bite model. Now, this is for like a cult or a high control group, but the reason I think it's helpful is because if you don't check all four boxes, you're still experiencing spiritual abuse. It's just not necessarily a cult. And
Hmm.
so I think it's still helpful for everyone. And this is something where like you could just Google like the PDF, which is great. So super accessible for everybody. So it's called the BITE model. It's BITE, and B stands for behavioral, I stands for information, T is thought, and E is emotion. And so it's four different areas of control. And so you can look at different examples of what those look like. Again, if you want to pull up the PDF. When I look at my story, I mean, I'm seeing all of it. Like I'm not able to ask questions and critically think. Like I've got thought control, right? It's like, no, I can't
Right.
actually ask questions. I'm going to get slammed for that. Emotional control, like I was not supposed to feel certain things, and I certainly cannot express certain emotions, like doubt, maybe being one that might resonate with someone.
I'm going to share this
For yeah,
while
great.
you talk. You keep talking.
Okay. For information control, like I wasn't, if you're not supposed to be listening to anything else, if you're not supposed to be reading anything else, if you're not supposed to be, I mean, we'll hear from people like I just heard this in a conversation this morning, actually, like in a like mainstream organization. And they're like, yeah, like don't go watch that documentary and don't do that because, they're just slandering. Well, no, you should be able to go watch and listen to whatever you want. And then you can investigate and decide.
Is this the
So,
model you're talking
and
about?
yes, yes,
Okay.
it is. Yeah, from freedom of mind. And so behavioral then as well. So we're looking at the rules, all of those kinds of things. You can see it in front of you. So again, if you do click, I believe if you clicked learn more, I think it would probably give you some examples.
Yeah, here you
Yes,
go.
there you go, of what it would look like. And that
And
can
then,
start to give you a framework of like, what am I experiencing? And then I'll add one piece of this to Danielle, but go ahead.
oh, I wasn't. I think that if I scroll down, it just has all the different, so like thought control
Mhm.
and all the different like things that you should look for and emotional control. So it has, and I'll link this in the show notes as well, so the people that are just listening that aren't actually watching the video, they can click on it and see like the behavioral control, information control, and then here we got thought control and emotional control.
Yeah. And so when we're talking about spiritual abuse specifically, we're seeing these things in a spiritual context in a way, again, that's like, this is too much control. Like there is something going on. The other element that I'll bring up that I don't think is on there is if you're in a certain group, I'm going to use Christianity as my example, but you could insert whatever religion. It could be a different one. If I'm using Christianity's book, primary book would be the Bible. Okay. So
Right.
like if you're Muslim, then it's going to be the Quran. So again, using this as our example, if it's Christianity, it's going to be the Bible. And if someone is using the Bible, they're pulling verses out of the Bible in order to manipulate and control and exploit. That's our spiritual component. If someone is in a position of spiritual authority over you, like they're a leader in some way, and they're not even using the book of that religion, they just are seen as a spiritual authority. They have power, they have influence. There's a power dynamic, there's a differential there.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're like saying, well, I really need you to do this because, and like that is spiritual abuse. Like that's being manipulative. So it can, again, there's a little bit more nuance here when we're like categorizing it as spiritual specifically. You're going to have that spiritual element. It's going to be someone who has spiritual authority, whether they're officially in leadership or they're not. It could be a spouse. This happens in homes. It could be someone who's in charge of the volunteers. It could be a youth leader. It could be a mentor. There's a lot of different ways it can look. And again, there can also be the usage of whatever that main book is, or texts are, like those are being manipulated, where if you end up taking a look, it's not actually in there. Like how I had said with my dad, I'm like, that's
Right.
literally not in there. In fact, the opposite is in there. So stuff was being cherry picked out, just like, I'm going to pull this line out of this whole book and I'm going to use it for my agenda. But if you go look, it literally doesn't even mean what I'm saying. And so that is an example too of what spiritual abuse can look like, again, within a religious context.
That makes sense. And we've gone over this a couple times, and I try, like when I'm covering a cult, and I like will cover something and be like, oh well, in a couple cults where they will change the Bible and like print their own version, where you're like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
like spiritual abuse, right? Or like
Mm-hmm.
again, if they're cherry picking something out, you're like, okay, well they're not using the whole Bible, they're not looking at it completely, they're looking at just
Mm-hmm.
this verse, and this is what everything is based on, this one thing. So I try to point those things out when I'm covering the cults, to be like, this is where a concern, a red flag
Yes.
should be waving.
Absolutely. Yes, I so love that you're doing that. Yes, and that is exactly what we want to look at, is like, what are the flags where we're like, okay, I feel a sense of caution. I'm at least going to slow way down and I'm going to observe and I'm going to investigate. If I have to do that quietly, that's another red flag, because I should just be able to like raise my hand. Hey, can we like have coffee? I have some questions.
Yeah.
But you can't do that. That alone is another flag. So yeah, that's my big thing for people. It's like, you may not even be sure yet, but like if anyone listens to this where you're like, gosh, maybe I am in something that's high control, like maybe I am in something that's even cult-ish. I'm not so much hung up on the label. Like if you're in something that's like, okay, this is problematic, I'm being controlled, possibly, like just slow down and please allow yourself to actually consider those things. Like allow yourself to actually get curious and look. And you could still decide to stay. You should have a sense of agency though, which means like you have the ability as a human being, like within Christianity it'd be free will.
Right.
You have, but like sense of agency is basically free will. Like I can have likes and dislikes, I can have opinions, I can have my own thoughts, like, and I can also make choices for my own life. Like I get to make choices for my life, whether everybody agrees with it or not. And so if you don't have that, if you're like, Naomi, what are you talking about right now? That is not me. That is not my life. Then I'd love to chat, because that's a big, big red flag right there.
So where can people find you? I will link everything in the show notes, but I would like you to talk about it. That way they know what they're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. So beEmboldened.com, beEmboldened.com. And then anyone can email, of course, hello@beEmboldened.com. But if you go to the website, like everything's linked through there. It's getting totally redone this year, which I'm super excited about because we've
That's
just
cool.
outgrown the current site. So, stay tuned. It's going to start to look different in the next 6 to 12 months. But everything is linked on there. So you can see the BE Plus program, that's the monthly subscription. You can see the mentoring. You can click on programs and it'll take you to the website with the digital courses. Go to our contact page, submit if you have a question. And I love having 15 to 20 minute, just like initial conversations with people. So if you're like, I don't really know what I need, I don't really know what I'm comfortable with. Like, let's just start with that. I would love to just chat and answer questions, give you some information, and then reach back out when and if you're ready. But at least like you'll know what you're considering. And I definitely want to make sure that people feel like they are informed so that they can decide what may or may not be a good fit. So yeah, feel free to fill out the contact form or send us an email at hello@beEmboldened.com.
That's amazing. Like I said, I will link everything. That way, whoever needs it can click on it. And if you don't want it right now, eventually maybe you'll come back to this and you will find it. That way we have it. But Naomi, thank you so much for everything that you're doing. I am so excited to just like have this conversation with you and to learn because I think that this is really important in this world that I live in of like cults and conspiracies that like we talk about how to not be in a cult anymore, like how to transition. And so I really appreciate you coming on here and just giving us all this information. Really helpful, I think.
So glad to be here.
Until next week, my friends, stay skeptical because you never know when a cult might jump out of the bushes and try to grab you. And I'll see you all then. Hey friends, Cult Chronicles is a Skeptic studio production, and we thrive on ratings and reviews from people like you. So wherever you're listening, go ahead and throw us a rating. And if you'd like to follow us on Instagram, our handle is @Cult Chronicles Podcast. Thank you so much for listening.